Here's the issue. Everybody thinks that if there's going to be a big fight with China or Russia, that'll be just like World War II. It'll be conventional. There's a saying that generals always fight the last war. Perhaps you've heard of it, or the last successful war. Well, this truism happens to be true. And for us, the last big successful war was World War II. And if you ask people in Washington, D.C., and think tanks or Hollywood, to imagine the future of war, usually it's some version of World War II with better technology. That's usually what they imagine. But why does everybody assume that if there's a fight with China or Russia in the future, it'll be a conventional one? It'll sort of like World War II. It won't. Conventional war is dead. And this is actually rule number 1 of my 10 new rules of war. Conventional war is dead. Data clearly shows in social science that there's nothing more unconventional today than a conventional war. So in this graph, this is from 1946 to 2015. The bottom line in red is all the sort of the conventional wars we've had in that time frame, and blue is everything else. Nobody fights conventionally except for us anymore. Yet we're sinking a big bulk, perhaps the majority of our defense dollars into preparing for another conventional war, which is the very definition of insanity. In fact, you could already argue we are at war with China and Russia right now, and part of their strategy is to keep us from knowing that, to keep us guessing, which we can discuss in Q&A. So what does war look like in durable disorder? A new type of global environment, a new type of conflict. It's getting sneakier. It is getting sneakier. War is getting sneaky. So let's look at the Crimea. Old rules versus new rules. So in the old rules of war, when the Soviet Union wanted to, take or reestablish control over a territory, they would use armored columns and tanks. Think of Hungary 56, the Czechoslovakia 68. Today, when they do that, they don't do armor. They could blitzkrieg through eastern Ukraine. They had the military to do so compared to Ukraine, but they didn't do that. What they used instead, new rules of war, are special forces, Spetsnaz, mercenaries like the Wagner Group, sort of fake pro-separatist militias like the Donbass Battalion, Little Green Men. Are you familiar with Little Green Men? These are Russian soldiers, wearing uniforms with no insignia, and so those little green men that little kids play with, those little toy soldiers, and they used a lot of propaganda and information warfare. They occupied eastern Ukraine and Crimea with a ghost occupation, and the reason this worked is because we live in a global information age where plausible deniability is more powerful than firepower. Kremlin gets that, we do not, right? They actually cut their defense budget like a year ago, yet their bellicosity has not been cut at all. So by the time the West was still figuring out what was going on, Crimea was a fait accompli. Victory. Victory. That's new rules of war. How about this? The South China Sea. China is taking over the South China Sea. Everything we're doing is not working. Old rules of war, they would require carriers. We'd throw in carriers as a deterrent, and they would back down. Now, we throw in carriers and the Navy into the South China Sea. It does not stop China at all. But what do? More carriers, more early book destroyers. The reason that their strategy is working is it goes something like this. And this is one of the new rules of war. We think of war and peace like pregnancy. You either are or you are not. And that's wrong. It's not war or peace, it's war and peace. Okay? Think of the Cold War, right? So what they do is, or think of war and peace like a light switch. It's either on or off. And so their strategy, China's strategy, is to keep the superpowers' light switch switched to off so that we remain docile. And as long as we are docile, they can get away with murder, and they do. So they get right in between the space. So war and peace is a false dichotomy. It's a fiction in our head. they exploit that fiction. They get right in between that space of war and peace. They go right up to the brink of war in the South China Sea, right up to where we will react, and they stop. But they keep everything they capture or create. And this is how they're winning the South China Sea, one island at a time, without carrier groups. And we're still fighting old rules of war by throwing in more carrier groups. Or mercenaries. So mercenaries are all over the world now. It's the biggest insecurity trend of the 21st century, in the early part, that is totally not covered, and that's by design. These mercenaries offer maximum plausible deniability. And I have a background in this world, and it's scarier than most people think. When you want something positively done in war and don't want your name attached to it, you hire mercenaries. And these are special operators. They're not just, we can talk about the world of mercenaries, but they're active in Ukraine, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Nigeria, Somalia, parts of the Congo. They're in Venezuela right now. Russia has sent the Wagner Group into Venezuela. Russia's backing Maduro. And they know that if the military leaves Maduro and joins the Guaido, then Venezuela is lost to Russian influence. So they sent in the Wagner Group to kneecap the Venezuelan military, to be enforcers, saying you will not defect. So that's new rules of war. So in the future, victory goes to the cunning and not the strong, yet the United States, for example, is still investing in the strong, and we wonder why we lose. So this is the new environment. Durable disorder is a new environment for war. We are not set up currently to fight in this environment. In fact, our habits, our systems, our bureaucracies refuse to even recognize this reality or adapt to it. We buy, train, equip, all of these things for an old set of rules of war, and then we get frustrated by the results. That is the problem. This is what I call strategic atrophy. And this answers the very first question I put up. So we have the best military, there's no question about it. We have the best of everything beyond the military. The problem is we have a low strategic IQ about how to deploy it. We have a low strategic atrophy. So for example, here's war as we imagine it. I like to say that budgets are moral documents because they do not lie. If you look at where we're putting our money, it's into things like technology, machines. And my favorite is the F-35. Now, this is a fighter plane. You've heard of it, probably. We, being US taxpayers, have spent on this program $1.5 trillion. Okay, we've spent more money than Russia's GDP. Think about that. Now, in 2 long wars, how many combat missions has this thing racked up? Any guesses? None? I'm going to go to my plant here. Yes. Zero combat missions. I'm just going to keep calling on you if I have any, I stall. 0 combat missions. Now, I'm an old infantry guy. I'm an old paratrooper. And the worth of any weapon is its utility. Now, we're buying more of these things. Now, in the South, I grew up in the North. In the South, we'd say, this dog don't hunt, right? We're buying more of these things. And they don't go to war. It's as useless as the battleship in 1939.